Welcome to the Griefy Girls Book Club, where every month we dive into a griefy read. From memoirs to biographies to fantasy, romance, and beyond. If it touches on grief, it's fair game. We're your hosts. I'm Kendel Rogers.
And I'm Rachel Dwyer. You might know us from our podcast, Two Girls with Grief. For us, reading is both healing and a powerful way to explore grief. So we knew it was time to give it the attention it truly deserves. Join us as we unpack our favorite moments, chat about upcoming reads, and even host interviews with guest authors. And you can bet we'll be yapping about our ever-growing TBR piles too.
So, whether you're here for the books, the banter, or a little bit of both, we're so glad to have you with us. Let's read, reflect, and grow in our grief together.
We are announcing our next book in our book club.
Woo!
And this is my choice. And you're obviously going to see, I feel like, a big difference between maybe big might be a big word, but there's a difference in our styles of reading about grief. So without further ado, my choice is A Beach Read by Emily Henry. And this book is a fictional book story that also has grief themes in it. And I feel like those are the books that I've been drawn to more than real stories or books like on how to deal with grief.
Mm-hmm.
I like reading stories about people living their life and how grief has impacted it and kind of how they deal with it in a fictional way.
Yeah. Yeah,
If that
and
makes
it's
sense.
fun. It's a fun book
Yeah.
so far.
And I just always love a good like love story. You gotta have the happy moments and the joy when you can. And I love a good, neat, cute love story. So this one's gonna be a lot more upbeat. Hopefully less tears, but it still
Hopefully,
deals
fingers
with
crossed.
fingers crossed. We'll see. But yeah, definitely a much lighter read for those who read Crying in H Mart and watched our episodes. I definitely cried like deep pitted tears, sadness from that book. But it was great. But yeah, it definitely was a tearjerker. Brought me all these different emotions, and I think this will do that less because it also
Yeah.
has like happy fun elements as well.
Yeah, I've liked it so far. I love the balance and I love the main character. She definitely has main character energy. And yeah, do you want to dive into chapter 1?
Yeah, I mean, like chapter 1 opens up with basically her life imploded, and I think one line that really I feel like people that are grieving can really relate to is that she's kind of like picturing like taking the first step into this cabin, and it's a cabin that basically she inherited from her dad that she didn't know existed because her dad had a mistress, and she found that out like after he passed away. So she's like a very dramatic, like, I'm going to open this cabin up and the world is going to end. But then there's a quote that she said, that already happened last year and it didn't kill you, so neither will this. And I feel like that's super relatable because
Yeah.
I think with grief, you kind of almost get this doomsday type. You could like spiral sometimes, like
For
everything's
sure.
bad, everything sucks. And it just felt like a very relatable line. Like, you got through it, stop making it a worse thing than it's going to be. And I think when you're grieving, that just is like a really easy thing to do, that you make situations seem like they're going to be worse than they are sometimes, or
Yeah.
like a hard thing, it's like you've already gone through the hardest thing, so
Yeah.
like you can get through it. So I thought that line was just so real to me.
Yeah, I think about, when I'm going through hard things in life and I'm like, but it can't be that hard because you've already done the hardest thing. You've
Yeah.
already heard the worst thing you could ever hear. You've already had to experience the saddest thing. Like everything else pales in comparison. And so yeah, I do like the same thing where I'm like, but like it's bad, but it can't be as bad as what you've already had to go through.
Yeah, sometimes you also like need that reality check of like,
Yeah.
I've been through hard things, I can keep doing it. Hopefully life doesn't throw you more hard things like continually. Don't follow in my footsteps. Eh, I definitely felt it was like a very dramatic opening of like, okay, the world sucks. And another line that she mentions in there is like just when her mom told her like, he's gone, Janie. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like everyone that's lost someone, there's that moment where you're either there and you experience it, or you get the phone call, the text, whatever. And there's nothing like that feeling of confirming like they're gone. I think that is such a gut wrenching feeling, and just like kind of that like one line was like, oh, I that's a heartbreaking line, and I
Yeah.
don't think you really understand it unless you've experienced grief. Just like 3 words, like he's gone, Janie, is like um, such a hard, such a hard like
Yeah.
sentence if
Yeah.
you've heard it. It's yeah, I don't know if you caught that when I know you're listening it through audiobook. I don't know if you caught that line.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because you definitely like kind of fly through it when you're listening to it, but you're bringing it up, and I'm like, yeah, that is such an important moment because I think every griever listening right now has those words that they heard, whether they were there in person or whether they heard it over the phone on the moment they found out that they lost a loved one. And mine was a phone call from like, I think the EMT, and it's just so it's funny how like these little words are so catastrophic in
Yeah,
destroying your life because immediately I'm tears and then I'm like, what do I do? Like I
yeah,
what do you do next? And I'm pretty sure a lot of people were in that same situation of like that's the pivot, that's the moment where in your life there's like the before that and then there's the after that.
yeah. And another thing that I feel like the first chapter really kind of goes through well is her talking about like I don't think she straight out says she's lonely, but it just really describes loneliness. Like
Yeah.
she's on the outs with her mom, someone she was really close to before, and they're not really speaking, and she only kind of mentions one really close friend that's not in close proximity to her. I mean, she's like a few hours away, but just like not easy to see.
The pressures from work that she's under, there's a lot of like
Yeah.
deadlines in her future.
And it just seems like you can, from just like the opening, you can feel like there's just a lot of loneliness
Mm-hmm.
and kind of feeling alone in her grief. And I think we've talked about it so many times, you hear other people talking about like grief feels so lonely,
Yeah.
and you feel so isolated from like the world that you left when they left. It's like you don't even know how to re-enter the world and feel the same. And sometimes you don't feel the same about just even the people that were in your life, because it's just a weird disconnect of
Yeah.
like, my world has totally changed. I don't even know how to have these conversations anymore, just be normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely kind of connected to just the loneliness. I just like it, to me, it just felt really lonely. Like her life felt really lonely at the
Yeah.
time. So when there's kind of like the little step of like meet cute with her grumpy neighbor, I was like, yeah, like the nice, like having that. And like that's, I think I've talked about before in like episodes where I was like, yeah, all this is gonna lead me to like the man of my dream, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so in this book it seems like it's happening, but
Yeah.
has not happened in real life. But it's a nice thought that like, yes, I'm gonna meet cute neighbor next door.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I appreciate, and I like that this is an undertone to the novel. You know, obviously the main plot is between her and her arch nemesis and their writing careers, and then you have like the subplot of like her reckoning her grief around her dad. And I like that it's a complicated relationship, and it's not complicated in the way we read about it in Crying in H Mart, where it was active complication. This is retroactive complication in that she's learning things about her father that doesn't align with how she saw him when he was alive. And I appreciate that that's a motif added into the story because I feel like a lot of people relate to that, where they're new, you find out more things about the person than you think you knew about them when they were alive. And in this case, it was a
a
cabin and
really
a
hard thing.
mistress.
Yeah.
It was
Really
quite a
hard
shock.
thing.
Yeah. And so she's having to like readjust how she thought about her dad, and then being like, but I still love him even though this is a very complicated situation. This is obviously a situation she doesn't want to be in, but it's a reality I think for a lot of people.
Yeah. And then in chapter 2, it enters with like there was a line where she basically says she no longer believes in happily ever after her dad's funeral. And she was like a romance writer.
Mm-hmm.
So not believing in that is really hard when you're supposed to be writing these beautiful stories, for people to read and fall in love with. So, and I definitely relate to that. I think she goes into it more about it being because that's when she found out that her dad had a mistress and there's this
Yeah.
cabin and all this stuff, and she found out her mom knew, so like I feel like her whole world view imploded,
Hmm.
which I feel like is kind of a common theme, like with just with grief in general. It's like when you lose someone, the fallout, but this is obviously a more dramaful explosion. That's a lot of information to get at your dad's funeral.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, we've talked about before, just kind of like even having the idea of thinking like happily ever after when you're dealing with grief, and just like
Yeah.
how unrealistic it can be, because that's not real life. Like it's not real
Right.
life, and unfortunately, yeah.
I like that she's and this is, I'm going to say this, and people are going to be listening and be like, I know Kendall, and she's the biggest gripe. I would say a couple years ago, I was that type of reader who was like anti-romance. Why was I? I don't know. I guess like I thought I was so superior and I was kind of pretentious about it. But it took the grief of my dad for me to like realize that romance books and like just fun pop music and just like fun girly things like you don't have to look down on. And for some reason like that was very pivotal to me, because now I totally appreciate and I respect the romance genre, and there's like a place for it, and I get it. It's such an escape from the reality of the lives we're living. And so I like that that's a undertone or a conversation that she's having with herself, but also like um justifying her as a romance writer is like she's also trying to combat this like gender stereotype of like, oh, only women read romance books and they all end in happily ever after. But she is even having this inner like complex conversation with herself of like, this is more than just romance. Like this is more than just women reading love stories. Like there's a place for this, and it's for good intent, and it's for escapism, and that's still such a positive piece of art that you put out into the world.
Yeah, and also I think Emily Henry does a good job of her romance books aren't so cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Like they have obviously the romance elements, but they do have, like, I think there's a few books that touch on death where I'm like, I was not
Mhm.
expecting this book, especially beach read. I was expecting it to be a totally like just fun romance, meet on the beach type book.
Right.
I was not expecting it to take this path. So she does a great job of kind of just intertwining the stories, and just kind of, grief is a theme in it, but it's not
Mhm.
necessarily the only thing going on. Um, but in chapter 2, they mentioned like her mom got chemo, her mom got better, and then her dad dies. And it's kind of like boom, and like something happens that you're not expecting, and you're like, oh, this
Yeah.
happy thing is like good. Her mom's better, beat cancer, and then her dad just dies. And I totally relate to that. Just like with my sister,
Mhm.
one, it kept going for a while, but my sister got sick and she was in a coma and she got better. She was getting better. And then my dad passed away.
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay. And then my sister was doing better and then she passed away. And then my mom got cancer and then she passed away. So there's a lot of those elements where
Yeah.
you're like, oh, something is like, and there was positives in between and positive
Right.
things that looked, that were happening. But it is hard when it's like, oh, you think that things have turned around and then they really don't.
Mhm.
And I really felt that in her book where she like mentioned that. And I was like, yeah, sometimes just bad shit topples onto bad shit.
Yes. Yeah, I think like
Unfortunately.
that's what I learned too with everything with my dad, was thinking like the pacing of things, like, oh, okay, so I had all this bad stuff with my dad, but like he's getting better, and so like I'm gonna have some time before the next bad thing happens. But the reality is, and I think like a lot of people experience this, is like there's no sometimes there is no break period where you can like recover emotionally. Sometimes it is like literally just bad shit topped onto bad shit, and you're like, when do I get a breather? Like, when does this
Yeah,
slow down?
yeah, this is not fair. And
Yeah.
a line that made me laugh in there is like she basically referred to herself as a crotchety grandma, like old grandma, because she was getting grumpy because there was a part where her next door neighbor is like having a party and it's loud music and she's like drinking and she's like, I want to go to sleep. And he's like, basically he was telling her like, this is a vacation spot. It's summer. It's a
Yeah.
weekend. Like, can you not be so grumpy? Basically telling her not to be so like that neighbor. And she realized, well, like, yeah, I'm a crotchety old grandma. My dad died. He had a mistress, and like now I'm in their sex house. Like, it's just like one of those things where you're like, okay, I get it. Like, there's so much going on that she's just like, I don't know, like how long I've been this person, but I feel like a lot of people that are grieving can kind of relate to just being this like feeling like this old grumpy person sometimes that like doesn't like anything because sometimes everything feels bad, and
Yeah.
that's fair.
And I don't know if it was in chapter 2 or chapter 3, but one I don't know if it was a line she said or just like the concept she was talking about, um, saying that it was hard to be angry with someone that you can't fight with because she was so mad at her dad and everything going on. And then she's like, but he's dead and I can't. She's like, that's even worse to like be mad at someone that you can't have a response from. And I think like I felt that way. I think a lot of people will feel that way. It's like you have this residual anger, but it can't be resolved because the person you need to talk to about it isn't there to be spoken with, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's really hard because I think it's hard to resolve those feelings because like
Mhm.
there's so many questions that you want to be at like you want
Right.
to answer, you can't ask someone back and forth like all the things you need to know, and especially like something like that that's such a bomb of
Hmm.
information that's like that's really hard to deal with. I feel like the last line that really called out to me in the book was after her and her neighbor, like love interest, future potential love interest, were like kind of going back and forth about his party. She didn't even say it to him. She just kind of said, I'm so tired. And she just kind of exhaled and was like, I'm so tired. And he immediately was like, I'll tell them to turn off the music. He sensed the type of I'm tired, I'm so
Yeah.
tired feeling. And he was like, okay, he made the party stop. And I feel like that's such a relatable feeling. And even just like those words are just saying, like, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
It's like grief is really overwhelming. Dealing with everything is overwhelming. Like, there's so many things you have to be doing to just be like a functioning human being when you lose
Yeah.
people. And sometimes you're just like, I'm so tired. Like, I feel like I have to do 10 times more things than someone else that's just living life with all their people,
Hmm.
and I think that's really hard. I don't think we get enough credit for just living
Yeah.
in a world without the people we love. And I really relate to that of just like, I'm so tired. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes you're just freaking tired and you don't want to deal with everything, but you have to. Like, you
Yeah.
really have to. And it's just to keep moving, it's like you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, knock on wood, like you don't make you're not in that bad of a mental state or anything, but yeah, I otherwise please get help. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it's a really hard just feeling to be like it just is tiring to deal with it. Um,
Yeah. It's
and
like an
then
emotional exhaustion or like a mental
yeah,
exhaustion.
yeah, you're just tired. It's like life can be really difficult sometimes, and you just need to figure out the best way for you to deal with that, still feel happy,
Yeah.
and that's different for everyone. The things in like chapter 3 that stood out to me was her talking about she moved to New York City with her boyfriend, and her dad was really like, go do it, go move. And she didn't want to miss any moments with her mom. And I think that's a hard thing, like not being near your loved ones when they're sick.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can relate to. It's hard. You just don't know what the right, like, what is the right decision, right? Because it's like, do you put your life on pause forever? Do you keep going and hope for the best and just keep in contact, visit? Like, there it's really hard to figure out like what is the best thing in those situations. And I liked how that got brought up and kind of her internal struggle with that, but her dad really pushing for her to do that.
Yeah. And I appreciate that like Emily Henry incorporates not like a flashback structure when we're looking back at the past of oh god, what was her name again?
Who?
The main character's name?
I don't even know her. It's Janie is that her mom calls her, but
Janie? Jane?
I think it might be Jane.
Okay, good.
I know it's Gus.
Yeah, I was like, we
Girl.
know Augustus.
January.
January. Okay, yes, because
Oh
there's a
yeah,
whole
duh.
thing about being born. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, sometimes it's like
wanted
when
to
it's
read it.
well, sometimes it's like in first person, so it's like
Yeah. I
you
was like,
don't
what's her name?
yeah, you don't like her name isn't like on repeat. Like it does
Yeah.
come up, but it's not on repeat, which I think is funny because at the end of chapter 3, like she meets uh she bumps into her neighbor, which she realizes is her old college crush slash
Mhm.
like nemesis. And she talks about like he didn't remember me. My name is January. It's not like it's something you forget. Like it's
Yeah.
not a right name. And we're both like, what's her name?
Whoops.
Whoops. Whoops.
Maybe it is a little bit.
Yeah, maybe it's a little forgettable. Just
Oh,
kidding. Um,
shit, I forgot what I was gonna
but
say.
well, I do remember one other thing that well, there's two things I remember for chapter 3 that I thought of. Was I don't remember in the context, but she just said like sometimes I just miss liking people.
Mm,
And I think it's when she went to the bookstore like coffee shop and
yeah.
like people are like talking to her and being friendly and she just was like not in the mood. Plus I think she was a little hungover, but she was like not in the mood to be friendly and cheery and do all the things that she wanted to do. Like she was saying like um her manager or someone would be like, you should go in there and like check if they have your book and talk to them and all the stuff. And she's like playing that in her head, but she's just like talking about how sometimes she just misses liking people. And I think that's a very relatable feeling where sometimes you just, I think it's more in your head
Mm-hmm.
than in reality, where sometimes you just feel like you don't like anybody or no one's gonna get it, or I think it's easy to kind of go down that route. And I think it's more so kind of a protecting yourself than the reality of you not actually liking people.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Although some people sometimes you just be grumpy and you don't like you take that on everyone else. So I think that can be true too. But I think that's a very relatable feeling of like sometimes you just especially like very soon after it's like you can be very
Mm-hmm.
grumpy with people, very active, um, and everyone pisses you off no matter what they do.
Yeah.
So I think that was also a relatable line where I was just like, yeah, that's true. That
Yeah.
happens.
I noticed that myself. Like, Texas is a very friendly state, and everybody's always waving and smiling, and like, it's just like over the top with their friendliness. Not in a bad way, but when
Yeah.
you are grieving, and especially right after, I was not. It felt like such work to be kind to other people. Like, I was going to the grocery store with my sunglasses on, and I was like, nobody needs to talk to me. I don't need to talk to anybody else. Like, I can self checkout,
Yeah.
like this is an independent mission. I don't need to make eye contact, nothing. Like, completely trying to just be
Aren't you
so
like six
isolated.
feet tall or like
Yeah.
close to it? Yeah.
I know.
Like no offense, I don't think you're someone that like just blends in.
No,
Like can just walk in. That's
not really. No. Yeah, but I mean, especially like I would say right after, and you are crying over everything.
yeah.
You look at it like salsa, and you're like, I remember when I'd eat salsa with my dad. It was like my hair was bad.
Yeah.
In sweats. I'm wearing sunglasses. I'm like, I don't want
Yeah.
any attention on me.
Yeah, everything can piss you off, make you
Right.
cry, like you just don't know. But I did like the end of just like the awkwardness in this chapter of like she bumps into him and she like ducks behind some books because she
Yeah.
doesn't know what to do and she realizes it. And I think it's always nice to think about kind of like the first crushes, the first
Mm-hmm.
things. I think why people really like the idea of like first crushes, first love type things is like it just seems so simple because it's
Yeah.
like I think half the time it's not like realized. You don't actually nothing really happens with it. It's just like that feeling of first crush feelings.
Yeah.
So I feel like I always get like giddy with these like, oh, this is so cute. Like the little
Yeah.
happy moments. And yeah, I like chapter 4 opens with her being like, they were college rivals, but like he didn't even know that they were because she was just like rivaling against him and she didn't think he even like noticed her. And she was like, he hated me. He thought my stories were too happy. And like he worked at like a cemetery or something at one point. Um, So
Quintessential bad boy.
yeah, like mysterious bad boy. You don't know why he's there, but just like an amazingly talented writer.
Yeah, she's
And
writing romance novels,
yeah,
he's writing like Hemingway type novels.
yeah, and um, yeah, it's interesting like how that feeling of just like having a crush on someone, you keep bumping
Mhm.
into them and maybe having that. And I think they always have like, they also have like good banter, which I think is always nice to have with someone, of like quick witted and having that. I think that's always fun. And I remember like she's pretended he didn't remember. It was unclear if he remembered her from her like understanding. And then so she pretended she didn't know him. So I think that's going to be interesting to go to the next chapters to see how that plays out. Um, and then another element that kind of just like the start of it is like she just was drinking a lot because she was sad, and he even brought
Mhm.
it up like, why are you drinking so much? Um, like what's going on? Because I think he's like, you're the cheery person, so why are you drinking? Which I think is relatable. I think you can often like drink too much or do other things when you're sad and
Yeah,
grieving. You're just
for
like,
sure.
just take the edge off. And yeah, I think that can be like a slippery slope. I think we talked about that. Of just
Mhm.
like you can easily get into that. And so just another like, I feel like relatable theme in the
Mhm.
book as well. And so the last chapter that we're going to talk about is chapter 5. We're going to be doing 5 chapters at a time. And this chapter, I think some elements where she's talking about like having a hard time. Her publicist or manager
Mhm.
is like hounding her, like, when you get these chapters, finish your book. And she wants to take a break, but she like can't afford it. She needs to sell the house for money, like her dad's cottage. She just has not been able to write books, which is her source of income, because she writes romance books and she can't bring herself to write anything happy. And I think that's relatable. It's like, if you want to break down, it's really hard to do that if you have to like pay bills and be independent. It's really much, it's like a luxury to be able to just break down, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. I think it's good that she brought that up in this book of like, she wants to break down, she wants to just give into her feelings, but she can't because she needs to make money and she needs to have a book within the summer in order to like
Right.
keep her publicist and like keep all of her potential income going.
Yeah, and I think that's like such a true reality to, I know you and I, we talk a lot about like the bereavement leave and everything, and that like 3 days, isn't even enough
Yeah.
for the whole process. And like there is a larger conversation here of like it's a luxury to be able to take time off of work so you could like have the time to process and get your life in order. And if you're someone like in charge of an estate, that's so much extra work. That's like a part-time job.
Yeah.
And some people do have that privilege to take that time off and be able to focus purely on grieving and all like the extra work you have to do with that. But the reality is a lot of people can't, like
Yeah.
people can't take time off of work and you have to continue like doing the job while grieving. And then on top of that, if you're doing other stuff for the passing of somebody, then this extra part-time job that you somehow just assumed and you're not getting paid for.
Yeah.
Like it's
No.
it's a lot to put on someone's plate, like especially all of a sudden when you're like, how can one person do that?
Yeah, it's really hard. And yeah, I like it's interesting because I know I've looked up if Emily Henry, I don't think she, at least now I know of, like she hasn't experienced grief. So she either does like really good research or
Mm-hmm.
something, because I feel like in the books that she does talk about it, I feel like it's super relatable
Yeah.
in so many ways. And so it's just interesting to me how well she writes it
Yeah.
for not experiencing it. So just like always a note with Emily Henry books is they're deeper than you think when you think of like romance
Yeah.
books. I think something also nice is not nice, but like in the book that something she relates to, she's having a hard time writing, and then she sees across her to the next cabin where Gus lives, and he's kind of pacing and doing the same thing, and she's like, "Oh, I'm not alone." He also, even though he in her mind is like more successful of a writer,
Mm-hmm.
he is still having the same hard time uh, writing a book as well. So I
Yeah.
think it's I see like kind of their initial connection and those little tidbits in there. And then I don't think you mentioned it, but at the bookstore which we're both big fans of bookstores, she mentions about like doing a community event, and then she gets invited to do like a book club, which is what we're doing here.
Mhm.
And the chapter ends with basically her attending there, and then boom, her like the last person she gets introduced to is her dad's mistress. And
Like
then the chapter
screeching halt.
ends. Yeah. And it just ends there. Like she meets the mistress. I think her name was Sonia, and end the chapter. So yeah, cliffhanger. That's a big cliffhanger. It's you wouldn't expect to see her there.
Right. At book
And
club of all places.
it's supposed to be your happy place. Like books are supposed to be your
Right.
happy place, like your refuge, your getaway. So big bummer to see your dad's mistress there. And so yeah, it's interesting to see kind of like how that plays out, their relationship.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm gonna, for Gus, I do love a good like reconnecting love story. So already I feel like I'm a lot more cheery because there's like fun, cute elements to look
Yeah.
forward to, instead of just gut wrenching things.
Yeah.
Which are hard. You're like, okay, this is just very real. So it's nice. We're gonna rotate our choices around, and our next chapters are going to be 6 through 10, six
Hmm.
through yeah, 6 through 10, and we're going to go through those, and hopefully some more juicy stuff happens because I'm a big
I'm
Gus
in
fan.
it. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah, I'm making Handel read happier grief books.
Girl, get out of your own head. No, I'm really liking it so far, and it's a fun little meet cute, and I'm really liking the main character. Like so much of romance, I think the ones that I like has a strong main character. And she is strong. She's opinionated, and I really like that when you have a really strong character with agency.
Yeah, I definitely do not like the like helpless
Yeah,
feeling where like you could do that, like just
yeah. I'm
you can
like do
handle it.
something.
You're independent. So please join us on this journey if you've read the book before, if you haven't read it and you want to read a more fun grief book or book fiction book with some grief elements. Definitely recommend joining us for Emily Henry, The Beach Read. We are going to releasing episodes every Monday on reading our thoughts on it, kind of how we relate to it. And it's just been a fun thing. We've had people that are joining along, buying the books, and yeah, it's always, I feel like it's another connecting piece that makes you think about grief in a different way.
For sure. I 100% agree.
And yes, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Two Girls with Grief Pod. And if you have any questions, book suggestions, email us at twogirlswithgrief@gmail.com.
Yeah, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week, everyone.
Bye.